In the beginning, there was darkness, and then there was light. But before there was understanding, there was mystery. For countless generations, when humans looked up at the stars wheeling overhead, or watched lightning split the sky, or felt the earth shake beneath their feet, they told stories. Stories of gods and titans, of divine battles and cosmic dramas. The thunder was Zeus hurling his bolts. The sea churned because Poseidon was angry. The sun rose because Apollo drove his chariot across the heavens. And then, something extraordinary happened. Something that had never happened before in all of human history. In the Greek colonies along the coast of what we now call Turkey, in the 6th century before the Common Era, a few individuals began to ask a different kind of question. They didn't ask which god was responsible. They asked what things were made of. They asked how nature itself worked. They looked for explanations that didn't require divine intervention, that didn't depend on the whims of immortal beings. They began, for the first time, to live by reason rather than myth. This was a revolution. A quiet revolution, perhaps, without armies or conquests, but a revolution nonetheless. These thinkers, whom we now call the Presocratics because they came before Socrates, dared to imagine that the universe could be understood. Not through prayer or sacrifice, not through consulting oracles or interpreting omens, but through careful observation and logical thought. They believed that beneath the chaos and confusion of the world, there were patterns. There were principles. There were explanations that any person could grasp if they thought clearly enough. Imagine what courage this required. To stand in a world where everyone else saw divine forces at work, and to say instead, there must be a natural explanation. To look at the same phenomena that had always been attributed to gods and to search for something more fundamental, something more universal. This was the birth of philosophy. This was the birth of science. This was the moment when humanity began to trust in its own capacity to understand. Among these pioneering thinkers was a man named Thales, who lived in the city of Miletus. Thales looked at the world around him and asked a simple but profound question. What is everything made of? What is the one fundamental substance from which all things arise? And his answer, his revolutionary answer, was water. Water. Think about this for a moment. When you observe the world carefully, water appears in so many forms. It falls from the sky as rain. It flows in rivers. It sits still in lakes. It crashes as ocean waves. It rises as steam. It freezes into ice. Water is everywhere. Water is essential for life. Nothing living can survive without it. Seeds need water to sprout. Animals need water to drink. Even the earth itself, Thales noticed, seems to float on water. Thales proposed that water was the fundamental substance, the primal source from which everything else emerged. It wasn't just that water was important. It was that water could transform. It could change its form. It could be liquid, solid, or vapor. And if water could take so many different forms, perhaps all the diverse things we see around us, earth, plants, animals, even fire, were ultimately different arrangements or transformations of this one primal substance. Was Thales correct? From our modern perspective, we might smile and think we know better. We know about atoms and molecules and the periodic table of elements. But Thales wasn't trying to provide the final answer. He was asking the right kind of question. He was establishing a method. He was saying that we should look for natural, unified explanations for the diversity we observe. He was inviting us to think about the fundamental nature of reality, not in terms of gods and myths, but in terms of observation and reason. As you rest now, consider the water in your own body. You are mostly water. Your blood, your cells, your very thoughts depend on water. Thales saw something profound in this simple substance. He saw unity beneath diversity. He saw transformation and change as part of the natural order. Following Thales, another thinker emerged from Miletus, a man named Anaximander. Anaximander had learned from Thales, but he pushed the inquiry deeper. he asked. If we're looking for the fundamental substance of reality, can it really be something as specific as water? After all, water has properties. It's wet. It's cool. It flows downward. But how could something with such specific characteristics give rise to things that are so completely different? How could water become fire, its opposite? How could something wet create something dry? Anaximander proposed something more abstract, something harder to grasp but perhaps more profound. He called it the Epeiron, which means the boundless, or the infinite, or the undefined. The Epeiron was not any particular substance we could point to or touch. It was instead the source from which all particular things emerge, and to which they all return. It was eternal and limitless. It encompassed all possibilities. Think of it this way. The Epeiron is like an infinite ocean of potential. From this ocean, opposites arise. Hot and cold. Wet and dry. Light and dark. These opposites separate out from the boundless, and they interact with each other, they struggle with each other, they give rise to all the particular things we see. The seasons change because hot and cold take turns. Day and night alternate because light and dark each have their time. Everything comes into being through this dynamic interplay of opposites, all of which ultimately derive from the boundless source. And here's something beautiful in Anaximander's thought. He believed that there was a kind of justice in nature, a balance. When one opposite gains too much power, it must eventually give way to its counterpart. Summer cannot last forever. Winter must come. The hot must yield to the cold, and the cold must eventually yield back to the hot. This isn't the whim of gods. This is the natural order of things, the balance that emerges from the boundless source of all. As you lie here, breathing slowly, feel the balance in your own body. The rhythm of breath in and breath out. The alternation of waking and sleeping. You are part of this cosmic balance, this dance of opposites that Anaximander described over 2,500 years ago. Then came Anaximenes, the third great thinker from Miletus. Anaximenes had considered both Thales and Anaximander, and he offered yet another view. Like Thales, he believed the fundamental substance should be something we could actually observe and name. But like Anaximander, he understood it needed to be something that could truly transform into everything else. His answer was air. Air, Anaximenes argued, is everywhere. It surrounds us. We breathe it constantly. We cannot see it, yet we know it's there. And most importantly, air can transform through processes of condensation and rarefaction. When air spreads out, becomes more rarefied, it becomes fire. When it condenses just a little, it becomes wind. Condense it more, and it becomes cloud. More still, and it becomes water. Even more, and it becomes earth, and finally stone. Everything in the world, from the most ethereal flame to the hardest rock, is air in different states of density. Feel your own breath now. The air moving in and out of your lungs. This simple act of breathing connects you to everything. The air you breathe in this moment has circled the globe. It has been breathed by countless others. It has been part of oceans and clouds and forests. According to Anaximenes, this air is not just necessary for life, it is the very substance of which all things, including your own body, are made. There's something wonderfully calming in this idea. Everything is one substance in different forms. The diversity of the world is not fundamental division, but rather different expressions of the same underlying reality. You are not separate from the world around you. You are a particular condensation of the same air that fills the sky. Among these early thinkers, there was also Xenophanes, who turned his rational gaze toward religion itself. Xenophanes noticed something that seems obvious once stated, but was radical in his time. He noticed that people always imagine their gods to look like themselves. The Greeks imagined gods with Greek features. The Ethiopians, he said, imagined gods with dark skin. The Thracians imagined gods with light hair and blue eyes. If cattle could paint, he mused, they would paint their gods as cattle. This observation led Xenophanes to a profound insight. If we always imagine gods in our own image, then perhaps what we're really doing is projecting our own form onto the divine. Perhaps the divine, if it exists at all, is nothing like us. Perhaps God transcends human form entirely. Perhaps the divine is neither male nor female, either young nor old, either limited to a particular place nor possessing human emotions like anger or jealousy. Xenophanes proposed that if there is a divine presence in the universe, it would be one, not many. It would be eternal and unchanging. It would not walk around or move from place to place like the gods of myth. Instead, it would pervade all things. It would think and influence reality through thought alone, not through human-like actions. This was a remarkable step toward monotheism, toward the idea of a unified, transcendent divinity rather than a pantheon of human-like gods. But Xenophanes didn't just present this as faith or belief. He presented it as a conclusion of rational thought. It made more sense, he argued, that the divine would be utterly different from us, rather than merely a more powerful version of ourselves. This was reason applied to religion. This was the same spirit of inquiry that Thales applied to nature, now applied to the most sacred beliefs of the culture. All of these thinkers, these pre-Socratics, were doing something unprecedented. They were living by reason rather than myth. They weren't denying that the world was mysterious or wondrous. They weren't claiming to have all the answers. But they were insisting that understanding was possible, that nature followed patterns, that behind the diversity and chaos of experience there was unity and order. They taught us that we don't need gods to explain lightning, we can investigate it. We don't need myths to explain the stars, we can observe their patterns. We don't need ancient stories to explain the nature of reality, we can think carefully about what we actually see. This shift from myth to reason is perhaps the most important intellectual transition in human history. It's the foundation of everything that came after: philosophy, science, mathematics, medicine. All of it rests on the simple but revolutionary idea that the universe can be understood through careful thought and observation. As you drift toward sleep now, rest in this knowledge. These ancient thinkers, so long ago, established that we are not helpless before the mysteries of existence. We have the capacity to understand. We have reason. We have the ability to look clearly at the world and discern its patterns. From myth to reason, from confusion to clarity, from fear to understanding, this is the journey they began, and the journey we continue. Let your breathing slow. Let your body relax. Let your mind rest on this simple, profound truth: the universe is comprehensible. There are patterns. There is order. And you, even in sleep, are part of that great, rational, beautiful order that these ancient Greeks first glimpsed 26 centuries ago. After the pioneering thinkers of Miletus opened the door to rational inquiry, philosophy took a fascinating turn. Two opposing visions of reality emerged, visions so different from each other that they seemed impossible to reconcile. On one side stood those who saw the world as constant motion, endless change, a river that never stops flowing. On the other side stood those who claimed that true reality never changes at all, that motion itself is an illusion, that being is eternal and unchanging. This tension, this great debate, would echo through philosophy for thousands of years to come. Let us first turn to Heraclitus, a philosopher from Ephesus who lived around 500 years before the Common Era. Heraclitus was known for his cryptic sayings, his puzzling pronouncements that seemed designed to jolt people out of their comfortable assumptions. He became famous for one statement above all others: you cannot step into the same river twice. Think about what this means. Picture yourself standing beside a flowing river. You step into the water, feel it cool around your ankles, feel the current pushing against your legs. You step back out onto the bank. A moment later you step in again. Are you stepping into the same river? It looks the same. It's in the same place. The banks haven't moved. But the water touching your skin now is completely different water. The water from your first step has flowed downstream, is already far away. New water has rushed in to take its place. The river you're stepping into the second time is not the same river at all. It only appears to be the same. But Heraclitus went even further. He suggested that you yourself are not the same person who stepped in the first time. In those few moments between steps, your body has changed. Cells have died. New cells have formed. Your thoughts are different. Your precise arrangement of atoms and energies is different. Neither the river nor you are truly the same from one moment to the next. Everything is in flux. Everything is constantly becoming something else. This is the vision of reality that Heraclitus offered. Reality is constant change. There is no permanence. What we see as stable objects, a mountain, a tree, a person, are really processes, patterns of change that maintain a recognizable form for a time but are never truly still. The mountain is being worn down by wind and rain. The tree is growing, its cells dividing, its leaves budding and falling. You yourself are not a thing but a happening, a continuous transformation that began at conception and will continue until death and beyond. For Heraclitus, this meant that we cannot trust our senses to show us permanent truth. Our senses show us the surface of things, the appearance of stability. But if we think more deeply, if we look beneath the surface, we see that everything is fire. Fire was, for Heraclitus, the ultimate symbol of change. Fire consumes. Fire transforms. Fire never stays the same for even an instant. The flame you see now is not the flame you saw a second ago. It's new fuel being consumed, new light being generated. And yet we call it the same fire. The world, Heraclitus believed, is like an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures. Everything in the cosmos is a transformation of fire into other forms, and those forms transforming back into fire, in an eternal cycle. Day becomes night becomes day. Winter becomes summer becomes winter. Life becomes death becomes life through new generations. The cosmos is not a static creation but a dynamic process, a cosmic dance where opposites transform into each other endlessly. But here is where Heraclitus becomes truly profound. If everything is constantly changing, if nothing stays the same, how is there any order at all? Why doesn't the world descend into complete chaos? Why are there patterns? Why do the seasons follow a predictable rhythm? Why does fire always burn upward and water always flow downward? Heraclitus had an answer: the logos. The logos is a difficult concept to translate. It means word, or speech, or reason, or principle, or proportion. For Heraclitus, the logos was the rational principle that governs all change. It's the hidden order within apparent chaos. It's the rule that determines how opposites interact. It's the measure that keeps the cosmic fire burning in just the right way. The logos steers all things. Think of it this way. Imagine an orchestra playing a symphony. Each musician is doing something different. The violins are playing their notes, the cellos are playing theirs, the flutes and trumpets and drums all have their parts. Everything is in motion. Nothing is still. And yet, out of all this motion, out of all this change, emerges something beautiful and ordered, the symphony itself. The logos is like the score that all the musicians are following. You can't see it in the music itself. You can't point to one particular note and say, there is the logos. But it's there, guiding everything, making sure that all the different changes harmonize into a coherent whole. Heraclitus believed that most people don't perceive the logos. They go through life seeing only the surface changes, never grasping the deep pattern that connects everything. They think they understand reality, but they're like sleepwalkers, moving through a dream. To truly wake up, to truly understand, we must perceive not just the changes themselves but the rational principle that orders those changes. We must see the unity within the multiplicity, the hidden harmony that connects all things. And this led Heraclitus to one of his most famous sayings: nature loves to hide. The deepest truths of reality are not obvious. They don't announce themselves. The logos doesn't parade itself in front of us. We have to search for it. We have to think carefully, observe patiently, contemplate deeply. The truth is there, but it's hidden beneath the surface of our everyday experience. It takes effort to find it. It takes wisdom to perceive it. As you rest now, breathing slowly, feel the constant change within your own body. Your heart beating, your lungs expanding and contracting, your blood flowing. You are like Heraclitus's river, never the same from one moment to the next, and yet somehow still recognizably you. The Logos is at work in you, maintaining your pattern even as everything flows and changes. But now we must turn to a very different vision of reality, one that challenged everything Heraclitus claimed. In the Greek colonies of southern Italy, a philosopher named Parmenides proposed something shocking. He claimed that change is impossible. He claimed that motion is an illusion. He claimed that true reality is eternal, unchanging, and perfectly still. How could anyone believe such a thing? After all, we see change everywhere. We see things move. We age. Seasons change. How can Parmenides deny what our senses show us so clearly? But Parmenides wasn't interested in what our senses show us. He was interested in what reason tells us, and reason, he believed, reveals that change is logically impossible. Here is how Parmenides argued. He said that only being exists. This seems like a simple statement, perhaps even a trivial one. But Parmenides unpacked its implications with ruthless logic. If only being exists, then non-being does not exist. How could it? Non-being is precisely nothing, and nothing cannot exist. This seems obvious enough. But now consider what change would require. For something to change, it must become something it was not. The seed becomes the tree. The child becomes the adult. But where does the tree come from? Not from being. The seed already has being, and you can't get more being from being. So it must come from non-being. But we've already established that non-being doesn't exist. Therefore, change is impossible. Nothing can come from nothing, and nothing can become nothing. What is must eternally be what it is. Similarly with motion. For something to move from here to there, it must at some point be where it is not. But how can something be where it is not? That would require it to both exist and not exist at the same location, which is a contradiction. Therefore, motion is impossible. Everything must be eternally at rest, unchanging, indivisible, complete. Parmenides called this eternal, unchanging reality, being, with a capital B. Being is not like the particular beings we experience in our everyday life. It's not this tree or that person or that mountain. It's the totality of what is, considered as a single, perfect, eternal whole. Being has no beginning and no end, because that would require it to come from or go into non-being, which doesn't exist. Being is continuous and indivisible, because any division would require empty space, which is non-being. Being fills all reality completely, leaving no room for change or motion or multiplicity. So if Parmenides is right, what are we to make of our everyday experience? What about all the change and motion we seem to see? Parmenides had a stark answer: it's illusion. Our senses deceive us. They show us a world of multiplicity and change, but this is not reality. This is appearance. True reality, accessible only through reason, is eternal and unchanging. We must seek stable being, not illusion. We must trust our rational thought, not our unreliable senses. This was a radical claim, perhaps the most radical claim in early philosophy. Parmenides was saying that the entire world of our experience is fundamentally unreal. Everything we see and touch and hear is mere appearance, while true reality is something completely different, something we can never perceive with our senses but only grasp with our minds. To defend and illustrate Parmenides' philosophy, his student Zeno of Elea created a series of paradoxes designed to show that motion is indeed impossible. These paradoxes are famous, and they're worth contemplating as you drift toward sleep, because they reveal something strange and wonderful about the nature of infinity and continuity. Consider the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. Imagine that Achilles, the swift warrior, is racing against the tortoise, and he gives the tortoise a head start. Zeno argues that Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. Why? Because first Achilles must reach the point where the tortoise started. But by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved a little bit forward. So now Achilles must reach this new point. But again, by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved a little bit farther. This continues infinitely. Achilles must always first reach where the tortoise was, and by the time he does, the tortoise is somewhere new. Therefore, Achilles can never catch up. Of course, we know that in reality, Achilles does overtake the tortoise. The paradox is resolved by mathematics. The infinite series of smaller and smaller distances adds up to a finite total. But Zeno's point wasn't to deny that Achilles wins the race. His point was to show that our concepts of motion and infinity lead to logical puzzles, suggesting that perhaps motion itself is not as straightforward as we think. Perhaps, as Parmenides claimed, motion is not part of true reality at all. Another student of Parmenides, Melissus, extended these ideas even further. Melissus argued that being must be unlimited and eternal. It cannot have boundaries, because what would be beyond those boundaries? Either more being, in which case the boundaries are meaningless, or non-being, which doesn't exist. Being must extend infinitely in all directions and in all time. It has no beginning and no end. It never started and will never finish. It simply is, eternally and completely. Melissus also emphasized that this eternal being must be completely uniform and homogeneous. It cannot have different parts or different qualities in different regions, because that would introduce division and multiplicity, which would require non-being to separate the different parts. True being is one, perfect, complete, and unchanging. Now, as you lie here in the quiet, consider this great conflict between Heraclitus and Parmenides. Is reality a raging river, as Heraclitus claimed, flowing and changing every instant, never the same from one moment to the next? Or is reality an unchanging stone, as Parmenides argued, eternal and motionless, with all apparent change being mere illusion? This wasn't just an abstract debate. This was a question about the fundamental nature of everything, including yourself. Are you a process of constant change, a pattern in the flow like a wave in the ocean? Or is your true self something eternal and unchanging, something beyond the flux of physical existence? Is the world we experience through our senses the real world, or is it a veil of illusion hiding a deeper, more perfect reality? The ancient Greeks didn't resolve this tension. In many ways, philosophy is still working on it, thousands of years later. The debate between change and permanence, between becoming and being, between the evidence of our senses and the conclusions of our reason, this debate runs through all of Western thought. As your mind settles toward sleep, let these two visions coexist peacefully. Perhaps reality is both river and stone. Perhaps change and permanence are both true in different ways. Perhaps the logos that Heraclitus described is the eternal principle that Parmenides sought. Perhaps the cosmic fire is itself unchanging in its nature even as it transforms everything it touches. Let your breathing continue steady and calm. You are both the changing river and the eternal being. You are the flux of sensation and experience, and you are the unchanging witness observing it all. These ancient thinkers saw different aspects of the one truth, different faces of reality. As you drift into dreams, you touch both the world of constant change that Heraclitus described, and the timeless peace that Parmenides promised lies beyond all motion and all multiplicity. The great debate between Heraclitus and Parmenides left Greek philosophy at an impasse. On one hand, Parmenides had shown with compelling logic that true being cannot change, cannot move, cannot come into existence or pass away. His reasoning seemed airtight: nothing can come from nothing, and nothing can become nothing. On the other hand, Heraclitus and our own senses tell us that change is everywhere, that motion is real, that the world is full of transformation and becoming. How could both be true? If nothing truly comes from nothing, how does change still happen? A new generation of philosophers emerged with a brilliant solution. They agreed with Parmenides that true being cannot change, but they rejected his conclusion that change itself is illusory. Instead, they proposed that reality is made up of multiple unchanging elements, and that what we call change is really just these eternal elements rearranging themselves into different combinations. Nothing new comes into being, nothing passes away, but the mixing and separating of eternal substances creates all the variety and transformation we observe. This approach became known as pluralism, because it proposed multiple fundamental realities rather than one. The first and perhaps most poetic of these pluralists was Empedocles, who lived in Sicily in the 5th century before the Common Era. Empedocles proposed that everything in the universe is made from 4 eternal, unchanging roots. He called them roots rather than elements, though we know them today as earth, air, fire, and water. These 4 roots, Empedocles taught, are eternal and indestructible. They cannot be created or destroyed. They cannot change into one another. In this, Empedocles agreed completely with Parmenides. True being does not change. But here is where Empedocles diverged from Parmenides in a crucial way. These 4 roots can mix together in different proportions, like colors being mixed by a painter on a palette. When fire and earth combine in certain proportions, we get one kind of substance. When water and air combine in different proportions, we get something else. All the countless different materials we see around us, all the variety of substances in the world, are simply different mixtures of these 4 eternal roots. A tree is a particular mixture. Stone is another mixture. Your own flesh and blood are mixtures of earth, air, fire, and water in precise proportions. When a tree grows, nothing new is coming into being. Rather, the 4 roots are gathering together in the pattern that we call a tree. When the tree dies and decays, nothing is truly perishing. The roots are simply separating and dispersing, ready to combine again into new forms. Birth is mixture. Death is separation. What we call change is really rearrangement. The roots themselves never change, but their combinations are infinite. But what causes these roots to mix and separate? What drives the cosmic process of combination and dissolution? Empedocles gave an answer that was as much poetry as philosophy. He said that there are 2 great forces that govern all things, love and strife. These are not merely emotions but cosmic principles, fundamental powers that act throughout the universe. Love is the force that brings things together. Love causes the roots to mix and blend. Love creates unity, harmony, combination. When love is dominant in a region of the cosmos, the 4 roots blend together thoroughly, creating complex structures and living beings. Strife, on the other hand, is the force that drives things apart. Strife causes separation, division, dissolution. When strife is dominant, the roots separate from each other, unmixing, returning to their pure, isolated states. The entire cosmos, Empedocles believed, cycles between these 2 forces. Sometimes love predominates, and everything becomes one mixed sphere, with all 4 roots blended perfectly together. At other times, strife predominates, and the 4 roots separate completely, each occupying its own region of space. Our world exists in the middle periods, when love and strife are balanced, sometimes one gaining the upper hand, sometimes the other. This is why we see both creation and destruction, both growth and decay, both life and death. Imagine the cosmos as breathing, expanding and contracting over vast ages. When love breathes in, everything comes together. When strife breathes out, everything falls apart. We live in the midst of this cosmic breath, experiencing both the gathering and the scattering. Your own life mirrors this pattern. As you grow and develop, love is at work, gathering elements together into the complex structure of your body and mind. As you age, strife gradually gains influence, slowly unmixing what love has combined. This is not tragedy. This is simply the natural rhythm of existence, the eternal dance of combination and separation. Empedocles taught something else that was quite radical for his time. He believed in reincarnation, in the transmigration of souls across different bodies and even different species. The soul, he taught, is a divine spark that has fallen into the material world, and through a series of lives, it works its way back toward the divine. In one life you might be human. In another life you might be an animal or even a plant, what he called the vegetable soul. Every living thing contains this divine element, this spiritual essence. This belief led Empedocles to a striking ethical conclusion. If all living things share the same type of soul, if the soul in an animal is fundamentally the same as the soul in a human, then killing and eating animals is a form of murder. It might even be killing your own relatives, your ancestors or descendants in their current incarnation. Empedocles himself became a vegetarian because of this belief, and he spoke with horror of blood sacrifice and meat-eating. He saw all of life as a family, all souls as kindred, regardless of the physical form they temporarily inhabited. As you rest now, consider this vision of interconnected life. The idea that the same consciousness, the same divine spark, might inhabit many different forms across time. Whether or not you believe in reincarnation literally, there is something profound in recognizing the continuity of life. The way that the same elements of your body have been part of countless other beings before you, and will be part of countless others after you. Around the same time as Empedocles, in Athens, another philosopher named Anaxagoras was developing a different version of pluralism. Anaxagoras looked at the problem of change and asked, if everything that exists must have always existed, and nothing new can come into being, how do we explain the incredible diversity of substances in the world? For roots seemed too simple to Anaxagoras. How could just 4 elements, mixing in different proportions, create the vast array of different materials we observe? How could earth, air, fire, and water combine to produce bone, or blood, or hair, or bronze, or olive oil, or any of the countless other specific substances? Anaxagoras proposed a bold answer. There are not 4 fundamental substances but infinite seeds, countless different basic ingredients, each one eternal and unchanging. There is a seed for every substance. There is a bone seed, a blood seed, a hair seed, a flesh seed, a gold seed, a wood seed, and seeds for every other material in existence. These seeds are infinitely small, too tiny to see individually, but they are the permanent, indestructible building blocks from which everything is made. Now here is where Anaxagoras' view becomes truly fascinating. He proposed that everything contains seeds of everything else. This principle is called everything in everything. In any substance, no matter how pure it appears, there are actually seeds of all other substances mixed together. What makes something appear to be gold is that it contains a preponderance of gold seeds. The gold seeds outnumber all the other seeds so completely that we perceive only gold. But there are also tiny amounts of every other substance present. Similarly, what we call water is mostly water seeds, but it also contains infinitesimal portions of earth seeds, fire seeds, bone seeds, and every other kind of seed. This might seem strange at first, but consider what it explains. When you eat bread and drink water, your body somehow transforms these substances into flesh and blood and bone. How is this possible? Anaxagoras would say it's because the bread and water already contained flesh seeds, blood seeds, and bone seeds. Your body doesn't create new substance, it simply separates out and recombines what's already present in your food. The seeds of your own body were already in the bread, just in different proportions. Digestion is a process of sorting and rearranging, not of transformation. Change, in Anaxagoras' view, is always a matter of changing proportions. When wood burns and becomes ash and smoke, the wood didn't truly transform into these new substances. Rather, the burning process separated the ash seeds and smoke seeds that were always present in the wood from the wood seeds themselves. The seeds are eternal. What changes is only how they are mixed together. But what causes these seeds to separate and combine? What determines the proportions in different objects? Here Anaxagoras introduced one of the most important concepts in ancient philosophy, mind, or nous in Greek. Nous is a cosmic intelligence, a rational organizing principle that arranges the infinite seeds into orderly patterns. Nous, Anaxagoras taught, is completely pure. It contains no mixture of seeds. It is the only thing in the universe that is truly unmixed, truly simple. And because it is unmixed, because it is not entangled with matter, nous can know all things and control all things. In the beginning, according to Anaxagoras, all the infinite seeds were mixed together completely, forming one chaotic, undifferentiated mass. Then nous began to rotate a portion of this mass. This rotation created a vortex, and the vortex began to separate things. The dense seeds moved toward the center. The rare seeds moved toward the periphery. Fast-moving seeds separated from slow-moving seeds. Like seeds sorted with like seeds. Gradually, out of the original chaos, the ordered cosmos emerged, earth at the center, water surrounding it, air beyond that, and fire in the outermost regions. And this sorting process continues, creating ever more refined and complex arrangements. Mind, then, is the source of cosmic order. It is the intelligence that divides the one into the many, that brings structure out of chaos, that creates the beautiful, intricate world we inhabit. Mind is what knows all things and arranges all things according to rational principles. A student of Anaxagoras, a philosopher named Archelaus, pushed this idea even further. Archelaus emphasized that mind divides the one. In the beginning there was unity, undifferentiated oneness. Mind introduced separation, distinction, particularity. This might seem like a negative process, as if mind is destroying the original perfection of unity. But Archelaus saw it differently. The division is necessary for consciousness, for knowledge, for life itself. Without separation there can be no awareness, because awareness requires a distinction between knower and known. Without division there can be no world, because a world requires different things existing in different places. Mind's act of dividing the one is actually an act of creation. This idea echoes through philosophy for centuries afterward. The movement from undifferentiated unity to diverse multiplicity, the emergence of the many from the one, becomes a central theme in metaphysics. And always there is the question, is this division a fall from perfection, or is it the flowering of perfection into actuality? As you lie here, breathing slowly and deeply, reflect on these ideas. Your own mind is engaged in constant acts of division and combination. Your senses receive an overwhelming flood of information, a chaos of light and sound and touch. Your mind organizes this chaos, separating relevant from irrelevant, combining similar sensations into patterns, creating the coherent experience of a world. You are like nous on a small scale, bringing order out of the confusion of raw experience. The pluralists, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Archelaus, found a middle way between the extremes of Heraclitus and Parmenides. They saved change without falling into chaos. They preserved the insight that true being cannot come from nothing or perish into nothing, while also honoring the evident reality of transformation and becoming. Change is real, but it is not creation from nothing. It is rearrangement of what eternally is. This is a deeply reassuring vision. Nothing is ever truly lost. The elements of your being have existed since the beginning of time, and will continue to exist forever. What we call death is merely a scattering, a separation of what was temporarily combined. And what we call birth is merely a new gathering, a fresh combination of eternal principles. You are a pattern in an eternal dance, a particular mixture of imperishable roots, a unique proportion of infinite seeds. The pattern changes, but what lies beneath the pattern is everlasting. Let this thought bring you peace as you drift toward sleep. The cosmic mind that Anaxagoras described is still at work, maintaining order, preserving pattern, ensuring that the infinite seeds combine in harmonious ways. Love and strife, the two forces Empedocles named, are still moving through all things, bringing together and pulling apart in eternal rhythm. You are held within this great process, safe within the wisdom that nothing true ever perishes, that being is eternal, and that change is simply the dance of everlasting elements in their infinite combinations. We now come to one of the most radical and daring ideas in all of ancient philosophy, a vision so stark and uncompromising that it shocked the ancient world and continues to provoke deep reactions even today. This is the philosophy of atomism, first proposed by Leucippus and then developed extensively by his student Democritus. To understand just how revolutionary their thinking was, we must recognize what they dared to claim: that the universe operates without divine guidance, that everything happens by necessity and chance alone, that there is no cosmic purpose or grand design. No gods. No purpose. Only atoms and necessity. Leucippus and Democritus looked at the problem that had occupied all the earlier philosophers. How can we explain change while respecting Parmenides' insight that nothing comes from nothing? And they proposed a brilliantly simple solution. Reality, they said, consists of only two things: atoms and void. That's all. Nothing else exists. Everything you see, everything you touch, everything you experience, is made of these two fundamental components. Let us begin with the atoms. The word atom comes from the Greek atomos, which means uncuttable or indivisible. Atoms, according to Leucippus and Democritus, are the smallest possible pieces of matter. They cannot be divided further. They cannot be broken down. Each atom is a tiny piece of solid being, completely full, with no empty space inside it. In this way, each atom is like a miniature version of the eternal, unchanging being that Parmenides described. Atoms cannot come into existence, they cannot pass away, they cannot be altered in their nature. They are eternal and indestructible. But here is the crucial difference from Parmenides. There are not one but infinite atoms, and they exist in infinite varieties. Atoms differ from each other in shape, size, and arrangement. Some atoms are spherical, some are jagged and hooked, some are smooth, some are rough, some are large, some are tiny. These differences in shape and size are the only real differences that exist. Everything else we perceive, color, taste, temperature, texture, are not properties of the atoms themselves but rather effects that arise from how atoms interact with our sense organs. And between these atoms, filling all the space they do not occupy, is the void. The void is absolute emptiness, complete nothingness. It contains no being whatsoever. Now, this was a shocking claim, because Parmenides had argued convincingly that non-being cannot exist. How can nothing exist? It's a contradiction in terms. But the atomists boldly asserted that the void does exist. It must exist, they argued, because without it, motion would be impossible. If reality were completely full, as Parmenides claimed, with no empty space anywhere, then there would be no room for anything to move. The void is what enables motion, what allows atoms to travel through space and rearrange themselves. Picture in your mind an infinite expanse of darkness, and within this darkness, countless tiny particles are falling, moving eternally downward through the void. This is the primordial state of the universe according to the atomists. The atoms are in constant motion, always have been, always will be. Motion is not something that needs to be explained or caused. Motion is simply the natural state of atoms. They fall through the void eternally. But here's something interesting happens. Due to small differences in their paths, atoms sometimes collide with one another. When a hooked atom collides with another hooked atom, they might catch on each other and stick together. When smooth atoms collide, they might bounce off. When many atoms collide and entangle in complex ways, they form larger structures. A rock is simply a vast collection of atoms that have become entangled together. A tree is another collection. Your own body is a temporary gathering of atoms that have come together in a particular arrangement. These atomic collisions and combinations are not guided by any intelligence or purpose. They happen purely by chance and by the mechanical necessity of atoms following their natural motions. When atoms collide, what happens next is determined entirely by their shapes and speeds. There is no mind, as Anaxagoras proposed, arranging things wisely. There is no love or strife, as Empedocles taught, bringing cosmic purposes to bear. There are only atoms obeying simple mechanical laws, and from these mindless motions, entire worlds emerge. Yes, worlds plural. Democritus taught that our world is not unique. In the infinite void, with infinite atoms moving eternally, countless collisions are happening everywhere. Some of these collisions create vortices, swirling masses of atoms that gradually organize themselves. Heavy atoms move toward the center of the vortex, lighter atoms toward the periphery. Gradually, a world takes shape, earth at the center, water surrounding it, air above that, and the lightest atoms of fire forming the celestial regions. This is how our world formed, not by divine creation but by the mechanical sorting of atoms in a chance vortex. And this process has happened countless times throughout the infinite void. There are innumerable worlds, some just forming, some flourishing, some already dissolving back into scattered atoms. Some of these worlds might be similar to ours. Others might be vastly different, with different arrangements, different proportions of elements, perhaps even different kinds of beings inhabiting them. The universe is far vaster and stranger than we can imagine, filled with endless worlds arising and perishing purely through atomic motions. As you lie here in the darkness, consider this vision. The bed beneath you is not solid in the way it appears. It is mostly empty space, with tiny atoms separated by relatively vast distances of void. Your own body is the same, mostly emptiness, with atoms temporarily gathered in a pattern that you experience as yourself. The atoms that make up your body right now have been part of countless other things before. Some of the atoms in your hand might once have been part of a tree, or a stone, or another person who lived centuries ago. And after your death, these atoms will scatter and join other combinations, becoming part of the ongoing atomic dance. This might sound bleak at first. Where is the meaning? Where is the purpose? Where is the comfort of believing that the universe was designed with intention, with care, with you in mind? The atomists offered no such comfort. They insisted on looking at reality as it truly is, without the consoling fictions of divine providence or cosmic purpose. And yet, there is a kind of peace in their vision, a liberation in accepting that we are part of nature's vast processes, no more and no less significant than any other temporary configuration of atoms. But wait. There is a problem with this purely mechanical view, a problem that troubled later philosophers deeply. If everything happens by necessity, if every motion of every atom is determined by the laws of atomic collision, then human freedom is impossible. Your thoughts right now, your choices tomorrow, your entire life is simply the inevitable result of atoms colliding according to fixed laws. You are no more free than a rock rolling down a hill. Everything you think you choose has already been determined by the atomic configuration set in motion long before you were born. This troubled the Epicureans, philosophers who followed in the atomist tradition several centuries after Democritus. They wanted to preserve the atomist vision of reality while also making room for human freedom and moral responsibility. And so they proposed a slight modification to the atomist theory, a modification so small it almost seems trivial, yet with profound implications. They suggested that atoms, as they fall through the void, occasionally swerve. This atomic swerve is completely random, unpredictable, and without cause. At random moments, an atom deviates ever so slightly from its straight downward path. This minimal swerve is enough to break the chain of mechanical necessity. It introduces an element of genuine chance into the universe, a break in the deterministic sequence of cause and effect. And this tiny break, multiplied across the countless atoms in your body and brain, is enough to preserve freedom. The swerve is so small, so subtle, that it doesn't disrupt the general predictability of nature. The laws that govern the motions of planets and the growth of plants still hold. But at the deepest level, at the level of individual atomic events, there is freedom from necessity. And somehow, through processes we don't fully understand, this atomic freedom manifests in the human ability to make genuine choices, to be the authors of our own actions rather than mere puppets of mechanical fate. Think about this as you breathe slowly in the darkness. Inside your body, at this very moment, countless trillions of atoms are in motion. Most of their movements are determined, following the patterns set by chemistry and physics. But perhaps, just perhaps, some of them swerve unexpectedly. And from these tiny swerves, cascading up through levels of organization, emerges your freedom to think, to choose, to be yourself rather than a mere machine. The atomists gave us a universe without gods, without predetermined purposes, without cosmic plans. They gave us a universe of matter and void, of chance and necessity, of worlds arising and perishing in endless cycles. This is a universe that doesn't care about us, that wasn't made for us, that will continue on indifferently whether we exist or not. And yet we do exist. We are here. We are conscious. We are part of this vast atomic dance, brief configurations of matter that have somehow achieved awareness, that can contemplate the atoms of which we're made, that can find meaning and beauty and purpose even in a universe that contains no inherent meaning or purpose. The void that the atomists described is not really emptiness after all. It is space, the arena in which everything happens. It enables growth because it provides room for atoms to move and recombine. Without the void, you could not have grown from infant to adult, because there would have been no space for the new atoms to be incorporated into your body. Without the void, seeds could not sprout, because there would be no room for the plant to expand. The void enables all change, all development, all life. As you settle deeper into rest, feel the vast spaces within your own body, the void between the atoms, the emptiness that makes your solidity possible. You are mostly space, mostly nothing, and yet here you are, thinking and feeling and existing. The atoms that temporarily form you are following their ancient paths, colliding and combining according to laws as old as time, perhaps occasionally swerving in ways that no law can predict. You are a temporary island of order in an infinite sea of atoms, a brief song sung by matter that has somehow learned to sing. This is the radical vision of the atomists. No gods to worship, no grand cosmic plan to fulfill, no ultimate purpose written into the fabric of reality. Just atoms and void, motion and rest, combination and dissolution. And somehow, miraculously, this is enough. This simple picture can explain everything: the formation of worlds, the growth of living things, the workings of thought and sensation, even the illusion of divine providence that comforted earlier generations. Everything reduces to atoms moving through void according to their nature, with perhaps the occasional unpredictable swerve that saves room for freedom. Sleep now, knowing you are atoms dreaming of themselves, void made conscious, matter momentarily aware of its own existence. In the morning you will wake, the atoms will continue their motions, the void will still surround and permeate all things, and the great cosmic dance will go on, either caring nor not caring, simply being what it is, atoms and necessity, with just enough freedom to make the dance worthwhile. While philosophers like the atomists were constructing grand theories about the fundamental nature of reality, a different group of thinkers emerged in ancient Greece who questioned something even more basic: whether we can know truth at all. These were the sophists, traveling teachers who went from city to city offering instruction in rhetoric, argument, and the skills needed for public life. The sophists were controversial in their own time and remain controversial today, because they dared to ask unsettling questions. What if truth itself is only persuasion? What if morality is merely convention? What if justice is simply whatever the powerful say it is? To understand the sophists, we must first understand the world in which they operated. This was the golden age of Athenian democracy, a time when any citizen could stand up in the assembly and argue for a particular policy, could take someone to court and plead his own case, could participate directly in governing the city. Success in this environment required the ability to speak persuasively, to construct compelling arguments, to sway audiences to your point of view. The sophists offered to teach exactly these skills. For a fee, they would train young men in the arts of rhetoric and debate, promising to make them effective speakers and successful citizens. But the sophists taught something more radical than mere speaking technique. They taught that on any question, equally strong arguments could be made on both sides. They taught that truth was not absolute but relative. They taught that morality was not natural but constructed. These claims struck at the very foundation of traditional Greek culture, which assumed that there were eternal truths, unchanging moral principles, and gods who cared about justice. The Sophists suggested that perhaps none of this was true. The most famous and respected of the Sophists was Protagoras, who came from Abdera, the same city that produced Democritus the Atomist. Protagoras is remembered for one statement above all others: man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not that they are not. This cryptic pronouncement has been debated for over 2,000 years, but its basic meaning is clear enough. Human perception and judgment are the standard by which we determine what is true and what is false, what exists and what does not exist. There is no absolute, objective truth standing above and independent of human experience. Think about what this means. You are lying in a room right now. Perhaps you feel the temperature as comfortable, either too hot nor too cold. But someone else in the same room might feel cold and want a blanket. Who is right? According to Protagoras, you are both right. The room is comfortable for you and cold for the other person. There is no absolute truth about the temperature, no God's eye view that determines the real temperature independent of anyone's experience. The temperature is what each person measures it to be. This applies not just to sensory perceptions like temperature, but to moral and political questions as well. What is just? What is good? What is beautiful? According to Protagoras, these questions have no single correct answer valid for all people at all times. Different cultures have different standards of justice, different conceptions of goodness, different ideals of beauty. And each culture's standards are true for that culture. The Persians think it's proper to bow down before their king. The Greeks think this is shameful, appropriate only before gods. Both are right, within their own cultural context. Man, humanity, is the measure. There is no higher standard to which we can appeal. Now, you might think this leads to a kind of nihilism, a sense that nothing really matters if everything is relative. But Protagoras didn't see it that way at all. In fact, he believed that virtue can be taught, and he devoted his career to teaching it. How can virtue be taught if there are no absolute moral truths? Protagoras' answer was subtle. While moral truths are not absolute, they are also not arbitrary. Every society needs certain virtues to function well. Citizens need to respect laws, to participate constructively in civic life, to treat each other with basic fairness. These virtues are not written into the cosmic order, but they are necessary for human communities to flourish. And these necessary virtues can be taught, just as any other skill can be taught. Through instruction, through practice, through observing good examples, a person can learn to be a better citizen, a more effective speaker, a wiser decision-maker. The fact that different societies might define virtue slightly differently doesn't mean that virtue is meaningless. It means that virtue is a human creation, adapted to human needs, and therefore capable of being transmitted through human education. As you rest quietly, breathing slowly, consider this idea. Perhaps the moral principles you live by are not eternal cosmic laws but rather shared human agreements, conventions that your society has developed to make life together possible. This doesn't make them less important. If anything, it might make them more precious, because they represent human wisdom accumulated over generations, solutions that people have discovered through trial and error for living well together. The Sophists developed techniques for arguing both sides of any question. Prodicus, another prominent sophist, was famous for his double arguments. He would take any proposition and show how you could construct a persuasive case for it, and then turn around and construct an equally persuasive case against it. Is justice beneficial or harmful? Prodicus could argue either way. Is democracy or tyranny better? He could make both positions sound reasonable. This wasn't just an intellectual game. It was training for real life, where you might need to defend your position against opponents, or where you might need to see a situation from multiple perspectives before making a decision. There was even a text called the Disalogue, meaning double arguments or contrasting arguments, which systematically presented equal voices on both sides of major philosophical and ethical questions. On every topic, whether wisdom and virtue are the same thing, whether virtue can be taught, whether the same things are good and bad, the text presents arguments on both sides with roughly equal force. The point was not to arrive at a definitive answer but to show that thoughtful people could reasonably disagree, and that the truth was not always as obvious as it seemed. This approach can be liberating. It frees you from dogmatism, from the assumption that your initial opinion must be correct. It encourages intellectual flexibility, the ability to see things from different angles. But it also raises a troubling question. If you can argue equally well for any position, how do you ever determine what's actually true? How do you decide what to believe, what to base your life upon? The sophists didn't always have a satisfying answer to this question, and this is part of why they made people uncomfortable. The most radical of all the sophists was Gorgias, who pushed skepticism about truth to its absolute limit. Gorgias wrote a treatise with a shocking thesis presented in 3 parts. First, nothing exists. Second, if anything did exist, we could not know it. Third, if we could know it, we could not communicate it to anyone else. With these 3 claims, Gorgias seemed to undermine the very possibility of knowledge and communication. How could he argue that nothing exists? Gorgias used the tools of Parmenidean logic. If being exists, is it eternal or generated? If eternal, it's infinite. If infinite, it's nowhere, because to be somewhere means to be in something, and the infinite cannot be in anything else. If it's nowhere, it doesn't exist. If it's generated, it came from either being or non-being. But being can't come from being, that would mean it already existed. And it can't come from non-being, because nothing comes from nothing. So being is impossible. Similarly, he argued that non-being is impossible. Therefore, nothing exists. These arguments may sound like wordplay, and to some extent they are. Gorgias was showing how philosophical reasoning, taken to extremes, can prove absurdities. But there's a serious point beneath the playfulness. He's demonstrating that pure logic, divorced from experience, can lead us astray. He's showing that the confident metaphysical systems of earlier philosophers might be built on shaky foundations. He's suggesting that perhaps we should be less certain about our grand theories of reality. Even if something does exist, Gorgias argued, we couldn't know it. Our thoughts are different from the things we think about. When you think about a stone, your thought is not itself stone. So how can you be sure your thought accurately represents the stone? You can't step outside your own mind to compare your mental image with the reality it supposedly represents. All you have access to are your own thoughts and perceptions. The things themselves, if they exist, remain forever beyond your direct grasp. And even if you could somehow know things as they really are, you couldn't communicate this knowledge to others. Language, Gorgias pointed out, is different from the things it describes. The word stone is not a stone. The words you speak enter your listener's ears as sounds, as vibrations in air. How these sounds produce understanding in another mind is mysterious. And how can you be sure that the understanding they produce in the listener is the same as the understanding you intended? Each person interprets words through their own experience, their own context. True communication of knowledge from one mind to another might be impossible. These are deeply skeptical claims, challenging our most basic assumptions about reality, knowledge, and language. And yet, paradoxically, Gorgias himself was a master of language, famous for his eloquent speeches. If communication is impossible, what was he doing when he taught rhetoric? The answer seems to be that while absolute truth might be unattainable, persuasion is very real. Even if we can't know objective reality or communicate perfect knowledge, we can still use words to influence others, to move emotions, to change opinions. Rhetoric, the art of persuasive speech, becomes more important than philosophy, the search for truth, because rhetoric actually works in the human world while philosophy chases impossible certainties. This brings us to the political implications of sophistic thinking, which were even more controversial than the epistemological ones. A teacher named Thrasymachus famously argued that justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. When you look at actual societies, Thrasymachus observed, you notice that laws are made by whoever holds power. In a democracy, the people make laws that benefit the majority. In a tyranny, the tyrant makes laws that benefit himself. In an aristocracy, the ruling class makes laws that preserve their privileges. In every case, those who have power define what counts as justice, and they define it in ways that serve their interests. So when we talk about justice, Thrasymachus argued, we shouldn't imagine we're talking about some eternal cosmic principle. We're really just talking about the will of the powerful. Justice is whatever those in control say it is. And if you're wise, you'll realize this and stop worrying about whether your actions are truly just. Instead, you should focus on gaining power, because once you have power, you can define justice however you want. This cynical view was extended by other sophistic thinkers like Critias and Callicles. They argued that conventional morality is a tool by which the weak control the strong. Think about it, they said. Moral rules always tell the strong to restrain themselves, to be moderate, to consider others. Why? Because the many weak people benefit from these rules. They use morality to shame and constrain the naturally superior individuals who would otherwise dominate them. The strong create laws for their own gain when they can, but when they can't, the weak band together and create laws that hobble the strong. According to this view, there are really two kinds of justice. There's conventional justice, the rules society imposes, which favor the weak. And there's natural justice, which would allow the superior to dominate the inferior. A truly wise and strong person, Callicles argued, would recognize that conventional morality is just a social fiction designed to control them. They would break free of these chains and pursue their own advantage boldly, as nature intended. These are disturbing ideas. They seem to justify tyranny, cruelty, and selfishness. They appear to demolish any basis for moral behavior beyond fear of punishment. And indeed, the sophists were often portrayed as dangerous corrupters of youth, people who taught the weaker argument to overcome the stronger, who made the worse appear the better cause. Plato, in his dialogues, frequently presented sophists as villains whose clever arguments needed to be refuted. And yet, we should pause before dismissing the sophists entirely. They asked important questions. Is morality natural or conventional? Do we follow moral rules because they're truly right, or because we've been trained to follow them? Is justice the same in all times and places, or does it vary? Can we know objective truth, or are we limited to perspectives and opinions? These questions don't go away just because they're uncomfortable. They remain live questions in philosophy today. As you lie here in the quiet darkness, your mind beginning to drift towards sleep, reflect on these challenging ideas. The sophists stripped away comforting certainties. They showed how arguments could be constructed for any position. They revealed how power shapes our concepts of justice. They questioned whether truth itself might be just persuasion, just the most convincing story. This can feel destabilizing, as if the ground has been pulled out from under you. But perhaps there's value in this destabilization. Perhaps we become wiser when we recognize how much we don't know, how many of our beliefs are assumptions rather than certainties. Perhaps society becomes healthier when people can argue different sides of questions, when multiple perspectives are heard, when power is questioned rather than simply accepted. The sophists may have been cynics, but they were also realists, describing how persuasion and power actually work in human society rather than how we wish they worked. And in teaching the skills of argument and persuasion, the sophists were actually enabling a kind of democratic participation. If virtue can be taught, as Protagoras claimed, then anyone can learn to be effective in public life. You don't have to be born into the right family or favored by the gods. You can learn the skills you need. You can develop your abilities through education and practice. This is an empowering message, even if it comes wrapped in uncomfortable relativism. So rest now with these questions. Man is the measure, Protagoras said. You are the measure of your own experience, your own truth. Double arguments exist for every question, presenting equal voices on both sides. Nothing can be known with absolute certainty, Gorgias suggested, but we can still act, still speak, still persuade. Justice might be the advantage of the stronger, but perhaps by understanding this, we can work to ensure that strength doesn't become tyranny, that laws serve genuine human flourishing rather than mere power. The sophists pulled back the curtain on truth and showed us the mechanisms of persuasion underneath. This knowledge, properly understood, need not lead to nihilism. It can lead to wisdom, to humility, to a clearer-eyed understanding of how humans actually think, argue, and decide together. And with that understanding, drift peacefully into sleep, where arguments dissolve and truth becomes whatever your dreaming mind measures it to be. After the sophists had questioned everything, after they had suggested that truth was relative and morality was merely convention, after they had shown how to argue any side of any question, Athens needed something different. Athens needed someone who would insist that truth matters, that morality is real, that knowledge is possible. That person was Socrates, and he changed philosophy forever. Socrates wrote nothing. Everything we know about him comes from others, primarily his student Plato. But even filtered through others' accounts, Socrates emerges as a unique and extraordinary figure. He spent his days in the marketplace of Athens, engaging anyone who would talk with him in conversation. He questioned politicians, poets, craftsmen, generals, anyone who claimed to know something. And through his questioning, he revealed something startling. Most people who think they know things don't actually know them at all. Imagine Socrates approaching someone in the marketplace. He might say, "I hear you're a teacher of virtue. Tell me, what is virtue?" The person would offer a definition, perhaps saying that virtue is doing good to friends and harm to enemies. Socrates would then ask gentle questions. But what if your friend is mistaken about what's good? Would it still be virtuous to do what they want? And is it virtuous to harm anyone, even enemies? Or does harming someone make them worse? And wouldn't making someone worse be a kind of harm to yourself? Through a series of questions, Socrates would show that the initial definition was inadequate, that it led to contradictions, that the person didn't really understand what they claimed to know. This process, which came to be called the Socratic method or dialectic, wasn't meant to humiliate people, though it often had that effect. Socrates compared himself to a midwife. His mother had been a midwife, helping women give birth to children. Socrates said he practiced a similar art, but with ideas rather than babies. He helped people give birth to understanding. The dialectic as midwifery means that Socrates didn't claim to put knowledge into people's minds. Instead, he helped them discover the knowledge that was already within them, waiting to be born. Think about what this means for a moment. Socrates believed that truth exists and can be known, but that it can't simply be transferred from one person to another like pouring water from one cup to another. Real understanding has to emerge from within. A teacher can't give you knowledge directly. The teacher can only ask the right questions, create the right conditions, guide you through a process of thinking that allows you to discover truth for yourself. When you finally grasp something through this process, it's yours in a way that memorized facts never are. You've given birth to it yourself. The dialectic proceeds through questions and answers. Socrates would ask what something is, receive an answer, probe that answer with more questions, reveal contradictions or problems, and invite the person to try again with a better answer. This process continues, refining and improving the understanding, moving closer to truth. Sometimes the conversation ends without a final answer, but even then, something valuable has happened. The person has been shaken out of their false certainty. They've realized how little they know. And this realization, Socrates believed, is the beginning of wisdom. Socrates had a simple but profound insight about himself. He claimed that he was the wisest person in Athens, not because he knew more than others, but because he knew that he didn't know. The oracle at Delphi had supposedly declared that no one was wiser than Socrates, and this puzzled him, because he didn't feel particularly wise. So he went around questioning people who were reputed to be wise, trying to find someone wiser than himself. But in each case, he found that these supposedly wise people didn't actually know what they claimed to know. They were experts in narrow skills, perhaps, but they assumed this expertise extended to everything, including the most important questions about how to live. Socrates, at least, recognized the limits of his knowledge. He knew what he didn't know. This is a lesson worth contemplating as you rest here in the quiet. How much of what you think you know is really just opinion, assumption, things you've absorbed from your culture without examining them? Socrates taught that wisdom begins with recognizing your own ignorance. Only when you admit that you don't know can you begin to learn. Only when you question your assumptions can you move toward truth. But Socrates wasn't interested in abstract philosophical puzzles for their own sake. He was fundamentally concerned with ethics, with how to live well. And here he made a claim that seems strange at first but becomes more profound the more you think about it. Socrates taught that virtue is knowledge. If you truly know what is good, you will do what is good. No one does wrong willingly. All wrongdoing comes from ignorance. This seems counterintuitive. We all know examples of people who seem to know what's right but do what's wrong anyway. We've probably all experienced this in ourselves, knowing we should do something but failing to do it, or knowing we shouldn't do something but doing it anyway. How can Socrates claim that virtue is knowledge, that knowing the good is the same as doing the good? The key is understanding what Socrates meant by knowledge. He didn't mean simply being able to state a fact or recite a definition. He meant deep understanding that penetrates to your core and becomes part of who you are. If you truly understand, with your whole being, that a certain action will harm your soul and corrupt your character, you won't do it. You couldn't do it any more than you could knowingly drink poison. Think of it this way. Imagine you're offered a delicious-looking pastry, but you know with absolute certainty that it contains a deadly poison. Would you eat it? Of course not. The knowledge that it's poisonous prevents you from eating it, no matter how appealing it looks. Socrates believed that wrongdoing is like that poisoned pastry. If you truly understood how it harms you, how it damages your soul, you couldn't choose it. The fact that people do choose wrongdoing shows that they don't really understand. They're deceived by appearances, mistaking what seems pleasant or profitable in the moment for what's truly good. This means that moral education is possible. If virtue is knowledge, then virtue can be taught, or at least can be discovered through the right kind of conversation and questioning. You don't need to be born with a virtuous character. You need to understand what virtue truly is. And this understanding comes through examination, through the dialectic process, through questioning and refining your ideas until you grasp the truth. Which brings us to perhaps Socrates' most famous statement, the words he spoke at his trial when he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and not believing in the gods of the city. Socrates said that he would never stop practicing philosophy, never stop examining himself and others. And then he made this declaration: an unexamined life is not worth living. Let these words settle into your consciousness as you rest. An unexamined life is not worth living. What could this mean? Socrates is saying that to live without questioning, without thinking carefully about your beliefs and values and choices, without striving to understand truth and goodness, is to live a life that has no real value, no real meaning. You might go through all the motions of life, working, eating, sleeping, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, but if you never stop to examine why you're doing these things, whether they're worth doing, whether you're living well or poorly, then you're not truly living a human life at all. You're living like an animal, driven by instinct and appetite, but not using the distinctive human capacity for rational self-reflection. This is a challenging teaching, perhaps even a harsh one. but it's also deeply hopeful. It means that a good life, a meaningful life, a life worth living, is available to anyone who's willing to examine themselves, to question their assumptions, to seek understanding. You don't need to be wealthy or powerful or fortunate. You need to think. You need to examine. You need to care about truth and goodness more than you care about comfort or reputation. Socrates himself lived according to this principle. He lived simply, often going without shoes, wearing the same cloak in all seasons. He spent his time in conversation rather than pursuing wealth or status. When he was brought to trial on false charges, he refused to compromise his principles to save his life. He could have escaped into exile. He could have offered to stop philosophizing. He chose instead to drink the poison hemlock and die, because living in a way that betrayed his mission of examination would have been worse than death. His life was a testament to his teaching. Examine your life, pursue truth and virtue, and accept whatever consequences follow. As you drift toward sleep now, consider what it would mean to truly examine your life. Not to judge yourself harshly or to dwell on regrets, but simply to look clearly at how you're living, what you value, what you're pursuing. Are you living according to principles you've thoughtfully examined, or are you simply following habits and assumptions you've never questioned? Are you seeking what's truly good, or are you chasing after things that only seem good? Do you know yourself? Do you know what you don't know? Socrates brought philosophy down from speculation about the stars and atoms and made it about human life, about ethics, about how to live well. He insisted that this question, how should I live, is the most important question anyone can ask. And he showed that answering it requires dialogue, examination, the willingness to question everything including and especially yourself. Through dialectic, through this conversational midwifery, we can give birth to understanding. Through recognizing our ignorance, we can begin to gain wisdom. Through understanding what is truly good, we can become virtuous. The sophists had suggested that virtue couldn't be taught, that morality was relative, that justice was merely power. Socrates responded with a resounding no. Virtue can be taught because virtue is knowledge. Morality is not relative because there is objective truth about what is good. Justice is not power but understanding, not force but wisdom. This was the moral earthquake that Socrates created, the awakening that reoriented Greek philosophy toward ethical questions and the examined life. Rest now in the assurance that examining your life is always possible, always worthwhile. The truth is there to be found, waiting for you to ask the right questions, waiting for you to give birth to understanding. An unexamined life is not worth living, but you are examining yours simply by reflecting on these ancient teachings, simply by allowing yourself to think deeply about what matters. Socrates would approve. And in the morning, you can continue the examination, continue the questioning, continue the great human project of striving to know yourself and live well. Socrates left no writings, but his most brilliant student did. Plato took the method of his teacher and built from it an entire vision of reality, a metaphysical system so influential that one philosopher would later say that all of Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato. Where Socrates focused on ethical questions and the examined life, Plato asked deeper questions still. If virtue is knowledge, what is it knowledge of? If we can be wrong about what we think we know, what would true knowledge look like? These questions led Plato to one of the most extraordinary ideas in all of philosophy, the theory of forms, the claim that there exists a higher reality beyond the visible world, and that this higher realm is more real, more true, more perfect than anything we can touch or see. To understand Plato's vision, we must begin with a simple observation. Think about beautiful things in the world around you. A beautiful face, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful song, a beautiful mathematical proof. These are all different, and yet we use the same word, beautiful, for all of them. What do they have in common? What makes them all beautiful? Plato would say that each of these beautiful things participates in beauty itself, in the form of beauty. The form is not any particular beautiful thing. It's not this sunset or that face. Its beauty with a capital B, the perfect, eternal, unchanging essence of what it means to be beautiful. All beautiful things in the world are beautiful because they share in this form, because they reflect it imperfectly. The same applies to every quality you can name. There are many just actions in the world, but they're all just because they participate in justice itself, the form of justice. There are many circular objects, but they're circular because they approximate the perfect form of the circle. There are many good things, but they're good because they share in the form of the good. The forms are the templates, the perfect patterns, the eternal archetypes of which the things we see around us are merely imperfect copies. This might sound abstract, so let's make it more concrete. Imagine a carpenter who wants to build a table. Before the carpenter begins, there's an idea of the table in the carpenter's mind. The carpenter understands what a table is, what makes something a table rather than a chair or a box. This understanding guides the work. The carpenter cuts wood and assembles it according to this mental pattern. The finished table is an attempt to realize the idea in physical form. But the physical table is never perfect. The wood has flaws. The measurements aren't exact. The table will eventually decay and fall apart. Yet the idea of the table, the understanding of what a table is, remains perfect and unchanged in the mind. Plato believed that something like this relationship exists at the cosmic level. The forms are like the carpenter's ideas, but they're not in any individual mind. They exist in a realm beyond space and time, a realm of pure intelligible reality. They're eternal, unchanging, perfect. The physical world we inhabit is like the carpenter's workshop, where these perfect patterns are imperfectly realized in matter. Everything you see around you, everything you touch and taste and smell, is an imperfect copy of an eternal form. The visible world is a shadow of a higher reality. Plato illustrated this with one of philosophy's most famous images, the allegory of the cave. Picture a group of people who have been chained in a cave since childhood. They're facing a wall and cannot turn their heads. Behind them is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners can see only these shadows. They've never seen the actual objects, or the fire. They've certainly never seen the world outside the cave. For them, the shadows are reality. They give names to the shadows, they notice patterns in how the shadows move, they become experts in predicting which shadow will appear next. But they have no idea that what they're seeing are merely shadows of real things. Now imagine that one prisoner is freed. At first, turning around would be painful. The fire would hurt their eyes. They would prefer to turn back to the familiar shadows. But gradually, as their eyes adjust, they would see the objects casting the shadows and realize that these objects are more real than the shadows they'd been watching. Then imagine this person is dragged up out of the cave into the sunlight. Again, the light would be painful at first, overwhelming. But eventually, their eyes would adjust, and they would see the real world, trees and mountains and sky, all illuminated by the sun. They would realize that the cave was a prison, that the shadows were illusions, that reality is far more vast and wonderful than they had ever imagined. This is Plato's picture of the human condition. We are like the prisoners in the cave. The physical world we perceive with our senses is like the shadows on the wall. It's not completely unreal, but it's not fully real either. It's a dim reflection of true reality. The forms are like the objects outside the cave, illuminated by the sun. And the sun itself represents the highest form, the form of the good, which gives reality and intelligibility to all the other forms, just as the sun gives light and life to everything in the physical world. Philosophy is the process of turning around, of climbing up out of the cave, of gradually adjusting our eyes until we can perceive the forms themselves rather than their shadows. As you rest here in the darkness, breathing slowly, imagine yourself on this journey. Imagine turning away from the flickering shadows of everyday concerns and opinions. Imagine climbing upward toward clearer and brighter understanding. The journey is difficult, Plato tells us. It requires effort and discipline. But it's the only path to genuine knowledge and genuine fulfillment. But this raises a puzzle. If the forms exist in a realm beyond space and time, beyond sensory experience, how can we ever come to know them? Our senses show us only the physical world, the realm of imperfect copies. How do we gain access to the perfect originals? Plato's answer was both beautiful and strange. He proposed that the soul recalls timeless truth. Before we were born, before our souls became embodied in physical form, we existed in the realm of forms. We perceived the forms directly. We knew beauty itself, justice itself, equality itself, all the eternal truths. But when the soul enters a body at birth, it forgets this knowledge. Learning, according to Plato, is not acquiring new information from outside. Learning is remembering, recollecting what the soul already knows but has forgotten. This is why the Socratic method works. When Socrates asks someone questions and they discover truth through dialogue, they're not receiving knowledge from Socrates. They're recovering knowledge from within themselves, knowledge their soul possessed before birth. The teacher is a midwife, as Socrates said, because the understanding is born from within, not implanted from without. Plato demonstrated this with a famous example. Socrates once questioned an enslaved boy who had no education in mathematics. Through carefully structured questions, without telling the boy anything directly, Socrates led him to discover a complex geometric truth about doubling the area of a square. The boy figured it out himself, guided only by questions. How could an uneducated boy discover mathematical truth? Plato's answer: because his soul already knew it. The questions simply helped him remember. This theory of recollection suggests something profound about the nature of the soul. The soul is not a product of the body. The soul existed before the body and will exist after the body dies. The soul belongs to the eternal realm of forms, not to the temporary realm of physical objects. The soul is immortal, divine, related more closely to the eternal truths than to the flesh it temporarily inhabits. And this brings us to a darker aspect of Plato's philosophy, one influenced by ancient mystery religions, particularly Orphism. Plato sometimes spoke of the body as the soul's prison. The Greek word for body, soma, sounds like the word for tomb, sema. This wasn't just a pun. It expressed a serious idea. The body traps the soul, weighs it down, obscures its vision of truth with physical needs and sensory distractions. The body constantly demands attention. It needs food, it feels pleasure and pain, it gets sick, it ages. These bodily concerns distract the soul from its proper work of contemplating eternal truths. The body is like chains binding the soul, like the cave that imprisons us in a world of shadows. During life, the philosopher's task is to separate the soul as much as possible from the body. Not by neglecting physical health entirely, but by not being enslaved to bodily pleasures and fears. The philosopher learns to turn attention inward and upward, toward the realm of forms, rather than being constantly pulled outward toward sensory experience. Philosophy, Plato said, is practice for death, because death is when the soul will finally be freed from its bodily prison and able to return to the realm of forms where it truly belongs. This might sound pessimistic, as if Plato hated the physical world and the body. But that's not quite right. Plato didn't think the physical world was evil or worthless. He thought it was good, but imperfect. It's beautiful, but with the derived beauty of something that reflects a higher beauty. It's real, but not as real as the forms. The body isn't evil, it's simply a limitation. And life in this world is valuable precisely because it gives the soul an opportunity to remember, to learn, to ascend toward knowledge of the forms. We're here in this cave not as punishment but as education, as a journey toward enlightenment. As your breathing continues, slow and steady, feel the distinction Plato describes. There's your body, lying here, subject to gravity and temperature, eventually subject to decay. And there's something else. Something that's aware of the body, something that can think about eternal truths like mathematical relationships and moral principles, something that existed before this body and will continue after this body ceases. That's your soul, according to Plato, the immortal part of you that belongs to the eternal realm of forms. The light moves from darkness to shadows to the sun in Plato's allegory. We begin in ignorance, seeing nothing clearly. We progress to seeing shadows and reflections, the imperfect copies of the physical world. And if we persist in philosophy, in the love of wisdom, we eventually see the forms themselves, illuminated by the good. This is the metaphysical ascent that Plato describes, from the lowest level of reality to the highest, from confusion to clarity, from mortality to immortality, from the cave into the light. This vision shaped Western thought for thousands of years. It influenced Christianity, which absorbed many Platonic ideas about the soul and eternal truths. It shaped medieval philosophy and Renaissance thought. Even today, when we distinguish between appearance and reality, when we seek universal principles behind particular instances, when we believe that mathematical truths are eternal and unchanging, we're thinking in ways that Plato taught us to think. As you drift toward sleep, let your mind ascend with Plato. Beyond the physical sensations of your body, beyond the particular thoughts and concerns of the day, there are eternal truths. Beauty itself exists. Justice itself exists. The good itself exists. These are not just ideas in your mind. They're real, more real than anything you can touch. Your soul has known them before and can know them again. In sleep, perhaps, the soul is freed temporarily from the body's demands and can remember more clearly the forms it once perceived. In dreams, unbound by physical laws, the soul can soar. And in philosophy, practiced while awake, the soul can climb step by step toward the light that illuminates all truth. Rest now in this knowledge. You are more than your body, reality is more than what you see, and truth awaits those who turn toward the light. Plato looked upward, toward a realm of eternal forms beyond the physical world. His student Aristotle looked downward, at the earth beneath his feet, at the living things growing in the soil, at the way humans actually live their lives. Where Plato saw the physical world as a mere shadow of true reality, Aristotle saw it as reality itself, worthy of careful study and understanding. Where Plato emphasized the soul's separation from the body, Aristotle saw them as united, inseparable aspects of a living being. Where Plato sought wisdom in the contemplation of eternal truths, Aristotle sought it in observing nature, understanding human psychology, and discovering how to live well in this world, not some other one. Philosophy, with Aristotle, came back to earth. Aristotle was Plato's student for 20 years, studying at Plato's Academy in Athens. But when he established his own school, the Lyceum, he developed a very different approach to philosophy. Aristotle was empirical, grounded in observation. He studied biology, examining hundreds of different species of animals. He studied politics, collecting and analyzing the constitutions of over 100 different city-states. He studied logic, ethics, physics, metaphysics, poetry, rhetoric. In every field, his method was the same: observe carefully, gather evidence, look for patterns, draw conclusions based on what you actually see rather than what you think should be true in some ideal realm. This practical, observational approach shaped Aristotle's ethics profoundly. When Aristotle asked how humans should live, he didn't look to eternal forms of goodness or justice existing in some transcendent realm. He looked at human nature itself. What kind of creature is a human being? What are we capable of? What fulfills us? What kind of life allows human nature to express itself most completely? These are questions we can answer, Aristotle believed, by observing humans and thinking carefully about what we observe. Aristotle noticed that every action we take for some purpose, aiming at some goal that we think is good. You eat because you're hungry and you think eating will satisfy that hunger. You work because you want to earn money. You earn money because you want to buy things or achieve security. But why do you want security? Perhaps to be happy. And why do you want to be happy? Here the questions stop. Happiness, Aristotle realized, is the one goal we pursue for its own sake, not for the sake of anything beyond it. Everything else we want because we think it will lead to happiness. But happiness we want simply because it is happiness. But what is happiness? Here Aristotle made a crucial distinction. The Greek word is eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness but really means something richer. It means flourishing, living well, fulfilling your potential as a human being. Eudaimonia is not a feeling or an emotion. It's not the pleasure you feel when something nice happens. It's a state of being, a condition of your whole life. A eudaimon person is someone who is living excellently, whose life as a whole is going well, who is actualizing the best possibilities of human nature. Think of a plant for a moment. A plant flourishes when it has the right soil, the right amount of water and sunlight, the right temperature. When these conditions are met, the plant grows strong, produces leaves and flowers, reproduces. It becomes fully what a plant of its kind can be. Human flourishing is similar. We flourish when we live in accordance with our nature, when we develop our distinctive human capacities to their fullest. And what is distinctive about human nature? Aristotle's answer: reason. We are rational animals. Our highest capacity, the one that sets us apart from all other creatures, is our ability to think, to deliberate, to understand, to choose wisely. Therefore, happiness as flourishing means living a life guided by reason, a life in which our rational capacity is fully developed and actively exercised. This doesn't mean sitting alone solving mathematical problems. It means using reason to govern your life, to make wise choices, to develop good character, to engage thoughtfully with others, to understand the world around you. And this brings us to virtue, which is central to Aristotle's ethics. Virtue, for Aristotle, is excellence of character. A virtuous person is someone who consistently makes good choices, who responds appropriately to different situations, who has developed their character in ways that promote flourishing. But what makes a choice good? What makes a response appropriate? Here Aristotle offered a principle that has echoed through the centuries. Virtue lies in the mean between extremes. Consider courage, one of the key virtues. Courage is not the absence of fear. If you feel no fear at all when facing danger, that's not courage but recklessness, a kind of deficiency. On the other hand, if you feel so much fear that you run away from every challenge, that's cowardice and excess. Courage is the mean between these extremes. The courageous person feels appropriate fear, recognizes real dangers, but acts anyway when action is called for. They face danger when it's necessary and important to do so, either seeking it out foolishly nor fleeing from it shamefully. The same pattern applies to other virtues. Generosity is the mean between stinginess and wastefulness. The generous person gives when it's appropriate, in appropriate amounts, to appropriate people. They neither hoard everything selfishly nor give away everything foolishly. Proper pride is the mean between vanity and self-deprecation. The properly proud person has an accurate assessment of their own worth, either inflating it nor diminishing it. In every area of life, wisdom is not found in extremes but in balance. As you lie here breathing calmly, feel this principle of balance in your own body. Your breath is either frantically rapid nor completely stopped. It flows at the right pace, the mean between extremes. Your muscles are either tensely clenched nor completely slack. They maintain just enough tone to support you comfortably. Your body naturally seeks balance, the mean between excess and deficiency. Aristotle is telling us that the same principle that governs physical health governs moral health as well. But finding the mean is not always easy. It's not a simple matter of splitting the difference mathematically between two extremes. The mean is relative to the individual and the situation. An Olympic athlete needs to eat more food than a sedentary person. What would be gluttony for one would be appropriate nourishment for the other. A soldier in battle should respond differently to danger than a civilian going about daily life. The mean varies depending on circumstances. This is why virtue requires practical wisdom, the ability to perceive what the situation calls for and to respond appropriately. And here is something crucial about Aristotle's ethics: virtue is not something you're born with. It's not a gift from the gods or a natural talent like musical ability or athletic prowess. Virtue is acquired through practice. Habits shape character. You become virtuous by performing virtuous actions repeatedly until they become second nature to you. This is similar to learning any skill. You don't become a skilled musician by reading about music or thinking about music. You become skilled by practicing, by playing your instrument over and over, by training your fingers and your ears until the right movements become automatic. Similarly, you don't become courageous by thinking about courage. You become courageous by acting courageously, by facing fears repeatedly until courage becomes your habitual response. This means that moral education is fundamentally about habit formation. When we're young, we need to be guided into good habits. We need to practice generous actions until generosity becomes natural to us. We need to practice telling the truth until honesty becomes habitual. We need to practice facing appropriate challenges until courage becomes our character. At first, these actions may feel forced or difficult. But gradually, through repetition, they become easier. Eventually, they become who we are. The generous person doesn't struggle with whether to give. Generosity flows naturally from their character because they've practiced it so thoroughly. Think about your own life for a moment. The person you are now is largely the product of habits you've developed over many years. The way you respond to frustration, the way you treat others, the way you manage your time and attention, these are all habitual patterns that have been shaped through repeated actions. And this is encouraging, because it means you're not stuck being whoever you currently are. You can change. You can develop new habits. You can shape your character deliberately through practice. It takes time and effort, but it's possible. Aristotle emphasized that virtue is pleasant to the virtuous person. This might seem strange at first. We often think of virtue as requiring sacrifice, as doing what's difficult rather than what we want. But Aristotle observed that the truly virtuous person actually enjoys virtuous action. The courageous person doesn't grit their teeth and force themselves to act bravely. They act bravely and feel good about it. The generous person takes pleasure in giving. The honest person feels comfortable telling the truth. When virtue has become deeply habitual, when it's thoroughly integrated into your character, it doesn't feel like a struggle anymore. It feels natural and right and even pleasant. This is what it means for philosophy to come back to earth. Aristotle isn't asking you to transcend your human nature or escape from the physical world. He's asking you to fulfill your nature, to become the best version of a human being that you can be. He's not offering mystical union with eternal forms. He's offering practical wisdom about how to live well right here, right now, in this world. The goal is eudaimonia, flourishing, a life well lived. And the path to that goal is developing virtue through habit. You identify what virtues are important, what excellences of character will enable you to flourish. You begin practicing the actions that embody those virtues. You repeat these actions until they become habitual. Gradually, your character transforms. What once required effort becomes natural. What once felt difficult becomes pleasant. You become, through your own sustained effort, a person who naturally tends toward the mean, who responds appropriately to situations, who exercises practical wisdom in navigating life's complexities. Aristotle also recognized that we don't flourish in isolation. We are social creatures by nature. We live in families, friendships, communities, cities. Part of human flourishing is participating well in these social relationships. Friendship, Aristotle believed, is essential to the good life. Not just any friendship, but virtuous friendship, where two people care about each other for who they truly are, not just for what they can get from each other. Political life too is important, engaging as a citizen in the governance of your community, contributing to the common good. Eudaimonia is not a purely individual achievement. It unfolds in relationship with others. As you rest here, breathing slowly and deeply, reflect on this practical wisdom. You don't need to escape your body or transcend this world to live well. You need to develop your character through practice. You need to find balance, avoiding extremes. You need to exercise reason in guiding your life. You need to cultivate virtues until they become habitual. You need to engage with others in friendship and community. This is the path to flourishing, to eudaimonia, to a life genuinely worth living. Wisdom is not found in extremes but in balance. Not too much, not too little, but just right for you in your circumstances. Not rigid rules applied mechanically, but flexible practical judgment applied wisely. Not inhuman perfection, but human excellence, the full flowering of your rational and social nature. Aristotle brought philosophy back to earth by showing that the good life is not some unattainable ideal in a transcendent realm. It's a real possibility here and now, available to anyone willing to develop their character through sustained practice of virtue. Rest now in this grounded wisdom, knowing that flourishing is within your reach, that you can shape your own character, that balance and practical wisdom are guides you can follow toward a genuinely happy life. After Aristotle's death, the world that Greek philosophy had known began to change dramatically. Alexander the Great conquered vast territories, spreading Greek culture across the Mediterranean and into Asia. Then Alexander died young, and his empire fractured. The small, independent Greek city-states that had been the center of political life were absorbed into larger kingdoms. Traditional civic identity weakened. People felt less rooted, less secure, more adrift in a vast and unpredictable world. In this time of uncertainty and upheaval, philosophy underwent a transformation. It became less concerned with grand metaphysical systems and more focused on a simple, urgent question: how should we live? Philosophy became therapy for the anxious soul, offering practical guidance for achieving peace of mind in turbulent times. Several schools of thought emerged, each offering a different prescription for tranquility and flourishing. Let us explore these Hellenistic philosophies, beginning with Epicureanism, moving through Stoicism and Cynicism, and concluding with the therapeutic skepticism of the Pyrrhonists and academic skeptics. Each school offered its own medicine for the human condition, its own path to serenity. Epicurus founded his school in Athens in a garden outside the city walls. The garden, as his school became known, welcomed everyone, including women and slaves, which was quite radical for the time. Above the entrance were words that captured the Epicurean spirit: "Stranger, here you will do well to tarry, here our highest good is pleasure." This might sound hedonistic, as if Epicurus were inviting people to endless parties and sensual indulgence. But Epicurus had something very different in mind. For him, happiness meant tranquil pleasure, a state of peaceful contentment rather than intense excitement. Epicurus distinguished between different kinds of pleasures. There are kinetic pleasures, the active sensations of enjoyment we feel when satisfying a desire, the pleasure of eating when hungry, drinking when thirsty, the excitement of entertainment. These pleasures are real, but they're fleeting and they depend on being in a state of need or lack. Then there are katastematic pleasures, the stable pleasures of simply existing in a state where needs are satisfied. This is the pleasure of not being hungry, not being thirsty, not being in pain, not being afraid. It's the pleasure of peaceful existence itself. Epicurus argued that this second kind of pleasure, this state of tranquility, is the highest good. The Greek word he used was ataraxia, which means freedom from disturbance, a calm and peaceful mind. This is what we should aim for, not intense thrills or elaborate luxuries, but simple peace. Think about this for a moment as you rest here. When you're comfortable, either too hot nor too cold, not hungry or thirsty or in pain, with no pressing worries troubling your mind, there's a kind of pleasure in that simple state of being. You're not excited, but you're content. This is what Epicurus considered the peak of happiness. To achieve this tranquility, Epicurus taught that we need to understand our desires and manage them wisely. He divided desires into three categories. First, there are natural and necessary desires. The need for food when hungry, for drink when thirsty, for shelter from harsh weather. These desires should be satisfied, but they're easy to satisfy with simple means. You don't need gourmet feasts, just adequate nourishment. Second, there are natural but unnecessary desires. The desire for luxurious food rather than simple food, for elaborate entertainment rather than simple conversation. These desires are natural extensions of basic needs, but pursuing them often leads to more trouble than they're worth. Third, there are vain and empty desires, the desire for fame, for unlimited wealth, for power over others. These desires can never truly be satisfied. No amount of wealth feels like enough to someone who craves unlimited wealth. No amount of fame satisfies someone who desperately seeks recognition. These desires are traps that ensure endless dissatisfaction. The wise person, according to Epicurus, satisfies natural and necessary desires simply and easily, moderates natural but unnecessary desires, and eliminates vain and empty desires entirely. Live simply. Take pleasure in basic things. Cultivate friendships, which Epicurus considered essential to happiness. Withdraw from the anxieties of political life and public ambition. Study philosophy and understand the nature of the world. And above all, free yourself from the two great sources of human misery, fear of the gods and fear of death. Epicurus was an atomist, following Democritus and believing that everything consists of atoms moving through void. This meant that the gods, if they exist at all, are made of atoms like everything else and have no interest in human affairs. They don't send plagues or blessings. They don't punish or reward. The universe operates by natural laws, not divine whims. You don't need to fear divine retribution or spend your life trying to appease capricious deities. As for death, Epicurus offered a simple argument: death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present. When death is present, we do not exist. We will never experience being dead, so there's nothing to fear. Death is simply the cessation of experience, like dreamless sleep, and what's there to fear in that? By eliminating these fears, by simplifying desires, by cultivating friendship and philosophical understanding, the Epicurean finds ataraxia, the tranquil pleasure of peaceful existence. This is philosophy as medicine, addressing the anxiety and restlessness that troubled people in uncertain times and offering a prescription: live simply, think clearly, fear nothing that cannot harm you. But not everyone found Epicureanism satisfying. Some thought it encouraged withdrawal from society, that it was too passive, too focused on avoiding pain rather than actively pursuing virtue and excellence. For those with this temperament, Stoicism offered a very different path. The Stoics taught that happiness comes not from managing external circumstances or withdrawing from involvement, but from developing inner strength, from living according to nature and reason regardless of what happens to you. Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Citium, who taught in a painted colonnade in Athens called the Stoa, from which the school got its name. The Stoics built on earlier Greek philosophy, particularly Socrates and the Cynics, but they developed a comprehensive system encompassing logic, physics, and ethics. They believed that the universe is a rational, ordered whole, governed by divine reason or logos. Everything that happens according to natural law, according to the rational structure of reality. This means that the universe is fundamentally good and purposeful, even when individual events seem bad from our limited perspective. The key Stoic insight is this: some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. What's up to us? Our own judgments, our intentions, our responses, our attitudes, our character. What's not up to us? Almost everything else. Your health, your wealth, your reputation, whether others love or hate you, how long you live, what happens to your body, the behavior of other people, natural disasters, political upheavals, all of these are fundamentally outside your control. You can influence some of these things to some degree, but you cannot fully control them. The Stoics argue that suffering comes from desiring and fearing things that aren't up to us. When you desperately want to be healthy and you get sick, you suffer not just from the physical illness but from the gap between what you wanted and what happened. When you fear poverty and you lose your wealth, the fear and disappointment add immense suffering to whatever practical difficulties poverty brings. But if you focus your desires and aversions only on what's actually up to you, on your own responses and judgments and character, then you become free from this kind of suffering. You can't control whether you get sick, but you can control whether you face sickness with courage and dignity. You can't control whether you lose your wealth, but you can control whether you lose your inner peace and self-respect. The Stoic ideal is the sage, a person who has achieved perfect rationality and virtue, who responds to every situation appropriately, who maintains inner tranquility regardless of external circumstances. The sage understands that virtue is the only true good and vice is the only true evil. Everything else, health, wealth, reputation, pleasure, pain, is indifferent. These things are not good or bad in themselves. What matters is how you relate to them, whether you maintain virtue in the midst of them. The sage is happy whether rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or criticized, because the sage's happiness depends on inner virtue, not external circumstances. This might sound cold or unfeeling, but the Stoics didn't advocate for emotional numbness. They recognized natural affections and appropriate emotions. It's natural to prefer health to sickness, wealth to poverty. The Stoics called these preferred indifference. The sage prefers them when possible but doesn't depend on them for happiness. And when circumstances involve other people, the Stoics taught a profound principle: cosmic sympathy binds all. This idea was developed extensively by Posidonius, a later Stoic. Everything in the universe is interconnected. We are all parts of the same rational whole, all expressions of the same divine logos. Human beings are not isolated individuals but members of a cosmic community. This means we have obligations to others, duties that flow from our shared rational nature. You should treat other humans with justice and kindness not because they're useful to you or because you'll be rewarded, but because they're fellow rational beings, fellow citizens of the cosmos. The Stoics extended this even further, seeing themselves as citizens of the world, cosmopolitans, with obligations to all humanity rather than just to their own city or nation. We are, in the Stoic view, like cells in a single living body. When one part suffers, the whole suffers. When we act, we affect the entire system. This cosmic interconnection should inspire both humility and compassion. As you breathe slowly here in the quiet, consider this Stoic vision. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control your response. You cannot control the world, but you can control your judgments about the world. Inner strength comes from aligning yourself with reason, accepting what nature brings, maintaining virtue regardless of circumstances, and recognizing your connection to all other rational beings. This is living according to nature and reason, the Stoic path to tranquility. Even more radical than either Epicureanism or Stoicism was cynicism, represented most famously by Diogenes of Sinope, who lived in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace and owned almost nothing. The Cynics took Socratic simplicity to an extreme. They argued that most of what people pursue, most of what society values, is worthless convention that enslaves us. Wealth, status, comfort, reputation, all of these are chains. True freedom comes through simplicity, through reducing your needs to the absolute minimum so that you depend on nothing and no one. Diogenes lived this philosophy dramatically. He rejected normal social conventions, living like a dog in public, which is what the word cynic means, dog-like. When Alexander the Great supposedly came to visit Diogenes and asked if there was anything he could do for him, Diogenes replied that Alexander could step out of his sunlight. The most powerful man in the world had nothing to offer someone who wanted nothing. The Cynics taught that virtue alone is sufficient for happiness, and virtue means living naturally, without pretense or artificiality, without the accumulated garbage of cultural convention. This is a hard path, one that few would choose. But it offers a kind of radical freedom. If you need nothing, you fear nothing. If you care nothing for reputation, no one can shame you. If you own nothing, no one can rob you. The Cynics demonstrated that human beings can survive and even thrive with remarkably little, that most of what we think we need is actually imposed on us by social expectations. While few would want to live as Diogenes did, the Cynic example poses a challenging question: how much of what you pursue do you actually need? How much is genuinely valuable versus merely conventional? Finally, we turn to the skeptical schools, which offered yet another form of philosophical therapy. The Pyrrhonian skeptics, named after Pyrrho of Elis, observed that philosophers disagree about everything. For any claim one philosopher makes, another philosopher denies it with equally strong arguments. The Presocratics disagreed about whether reality is one or many, whether change is real or illusory. Plato and Aristotle disagreed about whether forms exist separately from physical objects. The Hellenistic schools disagree about what constitutes happiness and how to achieve it. These disagreements seem endless and unresolvable. The Pyrrhonists concluded that we should suspend judgment on all disputed questions. We cannot know which philosophical theory is true, so we should neither affirm nor deny any of them. We should live in a state of epiche, suspension of judgment. This might seem like it would lead to paralysis, unable to act because you don't know what's true. But the Pyrrhonists argued that suspending judgment actually leads to tranquility. When you stop worrying about finding absolute truth, when you stop getting attached to particular beliefs and defending them against all challenges, when you simply accept that you don't know and that's okay, a kind of peace descends. The Pyrrhonist lives by appearances and customs without commitment. When you're hungry, you eat, following the natural inclination. When in Rome, you follow Roman customs, not because they're objectively right but because it's practical to do so. You navigate life using appearances as guides without claiming to know the underlying reality. And supposedly, this produces ataraxia, the same tranquility that Epicurus sought but achieved through a different route. Doubt becomes medicine, curing the disease of dogmatic certainty. A more moderate form of skepticism was practiced by the academic skeptics, philosophers in Plato's academy who had become skeptical about the possibility of certain knowledge. Unlike the Pyrrhonists, they didn't aim for complete suspension of judgment. Instead, they developed the idea that we can use probable impressions to guide action. We can't achieve certainty, but we can assess which beliefs seem more reasonable, more well-supported, more coherent. We can act on these probable beliefs while remaining open to revising them if new evidence emerges. This is a practical skepticism that acknowledges uncertainty while still allowing for rational decision-making. These Hellenistic schools represented different responses to the same fundamental challenge: how to achieve peace of mind in an uncertain, often harsh world. The Epicureans said withdraw into simplicity and friendship, eliminate false fears, and enjoy tranquil pleasure. The Stoics said strengthen yourself from within, control what's yours to control, accept everything else with equanimity, and live virtuously regardless of circumstances. The Cynics said free yourself through radical simplicity, reject social conventions, and depend on nothing. The Skeptics said stop fighting over what you can't know, suspend judgment, or hold beliefs lightly, and find peace in letting go of certainty. What unites all these schools is the understanding of philosophy as therapy for the soul. They weren't primarily interested in abstract theoretical questions. They were interested in how human beings can live well, can find tranquility and fulfillment despite the challenges and uncertainties of existence. Each school offered a diagnosis of what makes us suffer and a prescription for how to heal. As you rest here, drifting toward sleep, you might find wisdom in all of these approaches. Like the Epicureans, you can appreciate simple pleasures and free yourself from unnecessary desires and groundless fears. Like the Stoics, you can recognize what's in your control and what isn't, and find strength in maintaining virtue regardless of circumstances. Like the Cynics, you can question what you truly need and find freedom in simplicity. Like the Skeptics, you can hold beliefs lightly, remain open to different perspectives, and find peace in acknowledging uncertainty. These ancient philosophies still speak to us because the human challenges they addressed, anxiety about the future, fear of death, desire for peace and meaning, these challenges remain universal across the centuries. Philosophy as therapy means philosophy that helps you live better, that eases suffering, that promotes flourishing. Each of these schools offer that in different ways to different temperaments. Some people find peace through withdrawal and simplicity. Others find it through inner strength and engagement. Some find it through radical simplicity. Others through letting go of certainty. The beauty is that these ancient physicians of the soul offer multiple medicines. You can learn from all of them, taking what helps and leaving what doesn't, assembling your own prescription for tranquility drawn from their collective wisdom. Rest now in the knowledge that humans have been seeking these answers for thousands of years, and while no single answer satisfies everyone, the accumulated wisdom of these seekers offers guidance, comfort, and hope for anyone willing to examine their life and ask, "How should I live?" We have journeyed through the birth of Western philosophy, from the first thinkers who dared to explain the world through reason rather than myth, through the great debates about change and permanence, through the pluralists who tried to reconcile these opposites, through the atomists who imagined a universe of particles and void, through the sophists who questioned truth itself, through Socrates who insisted that the examined life is the only life worth living, through Plato who pointed us toward a realm of eternal forms, through Aristotle who brought philosophy back to the practical wisdom of living well on earth, and through the Hellenistic schools that offered different medicines for the anxious soul. Now, as we near the end of our journey, let us reflect on what all of this means, on the legacy these ancient Greek thinkers left to humanity. One of the most important lessons the Greeks taught, though it emerged gradually through their debates and disagreements, is the value of philosophy in moderation. The ancient world produced some philosophers who took their ideas to such extremes that they became impractical, or even harmful. The Cynics lived in jars and rejected all social conventions. Some atomists concluded that nothing matters if everything is just atoms randomly colliding. Some sophists seemed to suggest that might makes right and truth is whatever you can convince others to believe. These extremes revealed something important. Philosophy, like everything else Aristotle taught us about, needs balance. Philosophy should illuminate life, not replace it. It should help you think more clearly, live more wisely, understand yourself and the world more deeply. But it shouldn't pull you away from the simple human experiences of friendship, family, participation in community, appreciation of beauty, engagement with the practical demands of daily existence. The best Greek philosophers understood this. Socrates spent his days in conversation with fellow citizens, not locked away in isolated meditation. Aristotle emphasized that humans are social and political animals who need others to flourish. Even Epicurus, who advocated withdrawal from public life, stressed the importance of friendship and created a community in his garden. The lesson is that philosophy works best as a companion to life, not a replacement for it. You can examine your life, as Socrates urged, without becoming so absorbed in examination that you forget to actually live. You can seek wisdom about virtue and happiness while still participating in the ordinary human activities of work and play and relationship. You can think deeply about the nature of reality while still enjoying a meal, watching a sunset, laughing with friends. Philosophy in moderation means bringing philosophical reflection to bear on life without letting it consume life entirely. The Greeks also grappled with a distinction that remains relevant today, the distinction between law as convention and nature as truth. This tension appeared again and again in Greek thought. The sophists emphasized that laws and moral rules vary from culture to culture, which suggests they are human conventions, not eternal truths. What Athens considers just, Sparta might consider unjust. What the Greeks think proper, the Persians might think shameful. If moral rules were written into the nature of things, wouldn't all humans recognize them? The fact that different societies have different rules suggests that law is convention, something we create and agree upon rather than something we discover. But other philosophers pushed back against this view. They argued that beneath the varying conventions of different societies, there are deeper natural truths. All humans need certain basic things to flourish: food, shelter, social connection, the exercise of reason. All human societies need some basic structures, some way of resolving disputes, some protection against violence, some means of cooperation. These needs point toward natural requirements for human flourishing that transcend particular conventions. The Stoics especially emphasize this, arguing that there is a natural law, a rational order to the universe that humans can perceive and should align themselves with. This debate between convention and nature shapes how we think about morality, law, and social organization even now. Are moral principles universal truths that apply to all humans, or are they cultural constructs that vary from society to society? The Greeks didn't resolve this question, but they taught us to ask it, to think carefully about which aspects of our moral beliefs are genuinely rooted in human nature and which are merely the customs of our particular time and place. Connected to this distinction is another revolutionary Greek idea: equality by nature. This concept emerged gradually and was never fully realized in ancient Greek society, which included slavery, excluded women from political participation, and often viewed non-Greeks as barbarians. Yet the philosophical seeds of universal human equality were planted by Greek thinkers. The Stoics taught that all humans share the same rational nature, that we are all sparks of the divine logos, all citizens of a single cosmic city. This means that the differences between slave and free, Greek and barbarian, man and woman, are merely conventional, not natural. In our essential nature, in what makes us human, we are equal. Socrates demonstrated this in his method. He questioned enslaved people and citizens, aristocrats and craftsmen, showing that the capacity for philosophical insight exists in all humans regardless of social status. When he led an uneducated boy to discover geometric truth through questioning, he proved that reason is universal, not the special possession of any privileged class. The soul, Plato argued, is divine and immortal in every human being, not just in the wealthy or well-born. Aristotle, despite maintaining problematic views about slavery and women, still recognized that the distinctive human capacity is reason, and reason is universal. These ideas took centuries to fully develop into concepts of universal human rights and equality before the law. The Greeks themselves often failed to live according to these insights. But the philosophical foundation was laid. Once you recognize that all humans share the same essential nature, once you see that reason and virtue are not limited to any particular group, the logical conclusion is that all humans deserve equal respect and consideration. The Greeks gave us the philosophical tools to arrive at this conclusion, even if they didn't fully embrace it themselves. As Greek philosophy matured, there emerged a debate about the relationship between philosophy and rhetoric, between the pursuit of truth and the art of persuasion. Plato had been deeply critical of rhetoric, seeing it as a dangerous tool that could make the worse argument appear the better, that could sway emotions without regard for truth. But Socrates, a contemporary of Plato who ran a rival school, offered a different vision. Socrates argued that rhetoric crowns philosophy, that the ability to communicate effectively is what makes philosophical insight valuable and practical. Think about this for a moment as you rest here. You can have the most profound understanding, the deepest wisdom, the clearest grasp of truth, but if you cannot communicate it effectively to others, what good is it? Philosophy that remains locked in the philosopher's mind benefits no one. Philosophy needs rhetoric to bring it into the world, to make it persuasive, to help it actually influence how people think and live. Socrates taught that the ideal educated person combines philosophical understanding with rhetorical skill, wisdom about what is true and good with the ability to persuade others of that truth and goodness. This represented a kind of reconciliation between the competing claims of philosophy and rhetoric, between the Socratic insistence on truth and the sophistic emphasis on persuasion. The best approach combines both. You seek truth through philosophical inquiry, through careful reasoning and examination of beliefs. But then you use rhetorical skill to communicate that truth effectively, to make it clear and compelling to others. Neither philosophy without rhetoric nor rhetoric without philosophy is sufficient. Together, they enable both the discovery of wisdom and its effective transmission. This integration reflects a broader truth about Greek philosophy's legacy. The Greeks didn't offer a single unified system of thought. They offered a conversation, a tradition of asking questions and debating answers, of proposing theories and testing them against objections, of seeking truth through dialogue and disagreement. They showed us different possible approaches to the fundamental questions of existence, multiple paths toward wisdom and flourishing. And they demonstrated that thinking carefully about these questions matters, that how we understand reality and ourselves shapes how we live. As you lie here in the darkness, your breathing slow and steady, your body relaxed, your mind beginning to drift, consider what these ancient thinkers gave to all of humanity. They gave us the idea that the universe is comprehensible, that reason can unlock its secrets. They gave us ethics, the systematic examination of how we should live. They gave us logic, the study of correct reasoning. They gave us political philosophy, careful thinking about how societies should be organized. They gave us metaphysics, inquiry into the fundamental nature of reality. They gave us epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. Every field of philosophy practiced today traces its roots back to ancient Greece. But more than any particular doctrine or theory, more than any specific answer to the questions they posed, the Greeks gave us something even more valuable. They taught humanity how to think. They showed that you don't have to accept traditional answers simply because they've always been given. You can question. You can examine. You can use reason to test beliefs and seek better understanding. They demonstrated that dialogue and debate can lead to wisdom, that challenging each other's ideas is a path to truth rather than a threat to social order. They proved that ordinary humans, using nothing but careful thought and observation, can make genuine progress in understanding themselves and the world. Greek philosophy didn't give answers, at least not final answers that resolved all questions once and for all. The Greeks disagreed with each other constantly. For every philosophical position one thinker defended, another attacked. Heraclitus said everything changes, Parmenides said nothing changes. Plato looked to eternal forms beyond this world, Aristotle found truth in the world itself. Epicurus sought tranquility through withdrawal, the Stoics through engagement. These disagreements weren't failures of Greek philosophy. They were its success. They showed that multiple perspectives are possible, that reasonable people can disagree, that wisdom comes not from memorizing authoritative answers but from thinking for yourself. What the Greeks taught was a method, an approach, a way of engaging with questions that matter. They taught us to define our terms carefully, to examine our assumptions, to follow arguments where they lead, to test theories against experience and logic, to remain open to better understanding. They taught us that an examined life is worth living, that virtue matters more than wealth or pleasure or power, that reason is our most valuable capacity, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, whether you call it the logos or cosmic sympathy or simply the community of rational beings. And they taught us that these questions never end. Each generation must ask them anew. What is real? What can we know? What is good? How should we live? What is justice? What is happiness? The Greeks didn't answer these questions for us. They couldn't, because the answers must be worked out by each person, each generation, in their own context and circumstances. But they gave us the tools to pursue these questions, the methods to think about them clearly, the courage to challenge conventional answers and seek truth for ourselves. As you drift now toward sleep, carry with you this legacy. You are the inheritor of a tradition stretching back 2,500 years, a tradition of careful thought, of questioning, of seeking wisdom. The questions the Greeks asked are still your questions. The tools they developed are still your tools. The conversation they began continues, and you are part of it every time you pause to examine your life, every time you think carefully about what matters, every time you use reason to navigate the challenges of existence. Greek philosophy didn't give answers. It taught humanity how to think. And in teaching us to think, it gave us something far more precious than any answer could be. It gave us the means to pursue truth ourselves, to develop wisdom through our own efforts, to live examined lives worthy of our rational nature. Rest now in this knowledge, knowing that the light the Greeks kindled still burns, that the questions they asked still matter, that the conversation they started continues, and that you, even in sleep, even in dreams, are part of the great human project of seeking understanding that began so long ago in ancient Greece.